Hi, welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, a couple of days ago, there was an incident at Cincinnati Zoo where a gorilla had to be shot to save the life of a boy. And this has resulted in some of the most bizarre and absurd reactions from my fellow human beings that I can certainly remember seeing in a long time. It's just astounding to me the way that people are reacting to this. And to me, it just lacks all proportionality. It is disconnected from reality, and it exposes, I think, that there's a big group of people out there who don't have a very good sort of philosophical underpinning to their view of reality and how they actually see the world. So first of all, my personal opinion is I don't mourn this gorilla. I don't mourn this gorilla at all. I won't be going to any candlelight vigils for a gorilla. Now, why not? Well, there's two reasons. Number one is I had no personal connection to this animal. None whatsoever. In fact, I'm willing to bet that 99% of the outrage warriors who are obsessing over this issue had never even heard of that gorilla until this incident made the headlines. I certainly hadn't, didn't even know it existed. Yet now they're acting as if they have lost their closest friend and confidant. It's just so disproportionate and absurdly so. Now, to be fair, there are the animal handlers. I can understand them feeling sadness because they have raised this animal from when it was a gorilla pup, a gorilla cub, whatever you call a young gorilla. And they have raised this gorilla from a young age. They've cared for it. And so they have a connection with it. And I can understand for them there would be a sadness there. But for the rest of us, no. There is no connection with this animal. When I look at this incident, I think, oh, that's a shame. And the reason it's a shame is because we have lost a creature that was beautiful and majestic, and we have lost an endangered species, a member of an endangered species. And so there's a frustration about that, and there is a sense of, oh, what a shame. Wouldn't it be nice if we could still have them? But there is no great sense of deep and overwhelming sadness about this, because at the end of the day, I have no real connection with that animal. And at the end of the day, this is just an animal. Now, some animal rights activists might say, oh, but you're heartless. You should have a connection with every living thing. And that's what, gives you that connection. No, we shouldn't. And no one does that. Even the most committed, diehard vegetarian still eats things that were once alive, that were living things, and doesn't have any trouble mourning the carrots on their plate. They're not sitting there crying tears every time they have to eat a cashew nut or consume a piece of cabbage because, they've taken the life of a once living thing. It's just absurd to suggest that we have or should have a connection with every living thing. We don't. And there's a really good reason why we don't have a connection with every living thing, because not every living thing has dignity. Human beings have an intrinsic worth because they have human dignity. Animals, plants, machines, other things that are not human persons don't have that dignity. They don't have the same value and worth. Their value is assigned to them by us based on external utility factors. So, for example, we look at that gorilla and we give it value because it looks different from other animals. It has a beauty and a majesty that makes it different. We also give it value because that animal is an endangered species. And rightly so, we say that gives it a certain value. But if that gorilla wasn't part of an endangered species and it was an ugly looking beast that sort of, didn't have that majesty and all the things that we assign to it from outside, we almost certainly wouldn't give it the same value and worth. But a human being is nothing like that. A human person, regardless of whether you are the last living person on earth or whether there's a billion of you left, you still have this incalculable worth because of the fact that you have human dignity. Regardless of whether you're beautiful and a majestic looking human being or you're someone really weak who just doesn't look that good, you still have the same dignity that you had, that someone who is a majestic, fine looking human being has, and therefore you have the same value and worth. And there is a sameness and a connection that I have to a human person, so that when a human person dies, I do mourn their loss because they are part of my human community. There is the loss of not just some sort of utility or function. There is the loss of something intrinsically valuable. Their human dignity, their worth their life has been snubbed out, and along with it goes that human dignity and all of the profound worth that they have. And so we should mourn other human beings, but we don't mourn animals in the same way unless we have some sort of personal connection with them, right? But none of us have this personal connection. I guarantee, like 99% of the people who are going nuts about this gorilla, and it's got to the point where they're even making death threats, people making death threats against the family of this boy, which is just absurd. If I'd been in that situation, and even if it wasn't my son, if it was someone else's son and I'd been at the zoo, I would have been putting my hand up to carry the ammunition to actually end that gorilla's life. Why? Because that gorilla doesn't have the capacity for higher reason. That gorilla wasn't sitting there thinking about the morality of its actions. That gorilla isn't looking to make some sort of deep and meaningful connection with that little boy. It's simply an urge-driven 180 kg beast. And it will act on whichever urge happens to be the strongest in that moment. The only connection that a gorilla really forms with a human being is one based on whether or not it thinks that you can satisfy or meet some of those primal urges that it has. Can you provide it food? Can you entertain it in some way? But if it sees you as a threat and thinks that you can't do any of those things for it, it would kill you in a heartbeat, and it wouldn't have any moral compunction about doing that because it doesn't have a moral life. It doesn't sit there and have a conscience and evaluate its moral decision making. It simply acts based on urge. And that gorilla could have killed that child in a heartbeat without even intending to kill it, thinking it was protecting it or thinking it was playing with it. It still could have killed that child just like that. And there would have been no issue at all for that gorilla. It wouldn't have even mourned for a second. Okay, so we need to get some perspective here. The people who are going nuts about this, I guarantee you that the majority of them tonight will sit down with a plate of lamb chops, and they will not be sitting there with that plate of lamb chops, crying over it and mourning the loss of Flossie. How could this happen? Oh, the sweet, tasty murder of Flossie. This is such a great evil. Pass me the mint sauce, would you? That's not going to happen, right? But why are these same people now going to these absurd lengths and think of the gorillas? It just shows not only is a lack of all proportion, but it's a really dangerous and delusional form of sentimentality. My father, who grew up on a farm, used to joke with us as kids, and he would say, "You townies have got no idea what it's like," particularly when it came to things like food and how food, animals were killed to make food. He said, "You've got no idea, you townies." And it was a joke. He used to have us on about it. But the point is, there is some truth to that here. You've got a group of people who are disconnected from the reality of what animal life actually is and how the world actually works. Animals are not persons. They don't act like persons. They don't even think like persons. All right? They are not persons. And thankfully, the people at the Cincinnati Zoo are not coloured by this delusional and detached from reality kind of thinking. They are people, because they work with animals, they understand how the reality of this thing works, and they made the right decision. As difficult as it would have been for them, the people who actually had a real connection to the animal, as difficult as it was, they made absolutely the right choice, and I salute them and I applaud them for doing that. And I think anybody out there who is just attacking this family and claiming that this gorilla should still be alive and saying that we should mourn this animal and this is a senseless death and all the rest of it, I'm sorry. You're just not connected to reality. And I would urge you to reevaluate whatever it is, the ideology that underpins your thinking about animals and humans, before you get into a situation where you make a really bad decision and it costs an infinitely valuable human person their life because of that dangerous sentimentality. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily.